Now I'd like to welcome to the programme Dr. James Casey, Disability Inclusive Climate Justice Lead with CBM Ireland. So thank you very much, James, for coming on.
Other things, Patrick.
CBM, it was originally the Christian Blind Mission. That was the original title? Has it changed, or is it still?
It hasn't. I can give you a little bit of background into them. I'm only new at
Sure.
CBM. I'm 6
All right.
months. So CBM itself, yeah, it was originally it's not an acronym anymore, and there's transformation happening. But yeah, it was originally started about 120 years ago by this German lad. He was a pastor, and to be fair to him, he was a great guy. He was taken aback by the atrocities that were happening in what was called the Turkish genocide at the time.
Right.
And he decided he needed to go help there. So I went out there and he did a bit of help. And I can't remember his name now. I can't give you the detailed account of CBM, but he ended up anyway doing great work and starting this missionary position and missionary position. And he eventually, like, he kept stuck to his values and his morals, and he ended up, he was in jail or put into a concentration camp in World War II because of his values for human rights and human dignity. And CBM itself, we've been in Ireland ourselves for over 20 years. We have a small team above in Granby Place there. I want to say hello to everybody above there. When it goes out, they'll be all tuning into this. Adina just got married and she brought back biscuits and sweets for everyone from so we're all looking forward to getting into them. So thanks very much. But yeah, CBM is a worldwide organization. People may not have heard of us. They may have heard of us. We've been going for over 120 years. In Ireland, we've been going for 20 years. And what we do is two things. So we take a dual approach to development cooperation. And what we do is that we work in the global south in countries, and we work in partnership with disabled persons organizations in one hand. So we support them, we listen to them, and we work with them, offer whatever support we can, and advocate alongside them. And at the same time, we have a health screening program as well. For instance, there's a really cool program we did about inclusive eye health in certain African countries, where we had a team of specialists went out with this wonderful, innovative little yoke that can tell if people have eye problems just by pointing their eye. It's very small, works very effectively. So we have a both approach to that. And we're based in many countries across the world. So there's CBM Global and there's the federated members ourselves, and Ireland is one of them. And we have country teams in various countries. So for instance, in Asia, we have country teams in Nepal and Bangladesh and the Philippines and Laos. And then in Europe, we have federated members here ourselves in Ireland and our colleagues in the UK. And then we have our colleagues in Australia, CBM Australia. And then in Africa, we've got our colleagues at country teams in CBM Kenya, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. And we also have an office in Bolivia, would you believe, on the other side of the world. So we're quite active in many countries. Oh, and Madagascar. I won't forget Madagascar. Sorry about that now. And we're quite active in many countries in the world. And our primary goal is to support disability inclusion and amplify disability inclusion and disability equality. So that's what we do within CBM.
I imagine in the developing world, disability is a great, it's a bigger problem here. Not that disabled people have it easy anywhere, but I imagine it's tougher now in the absence of social welfare and special assistance payments and things like that,
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll be honest, Patrick, like so I've traveled I haven't gone much places, but I've spent a little bit of time in East Africa, and I talk to my colleagues all over the world every week in different countries. And I'm from a very strong DPO background, and I'm a disabled person myself, and I'm a disabled activist, and I'm from the west of Ireland, so that's the least developed too. So the developing world is a massive world too, and it wouldn't even be a developing world. I mean, there's some parts of the world it shocks you when you go there because it's not like you think. I mean, they're very developed. They've got huge infrastructure systems. Policy-wise, in many countries, disabled people are way ahead than they are here,
Mm,
purely because there is a political will to involve disabled people. They may not have the resources,
mm,
but they have the actual inclusion in these policy making decisions, whether it's in climate, social policy, education, etc. And there's a greater understanding in many of the countries in the global south. So, for instance, in Africa and the Near East and Asia, there's a greater understanding of the CRPD than there would be here. Um, and there's many reasons for that. And they're also much more inclined to integrate into or to interact with like the sustainable development goals and multilateral stuff like that as well. Um, so but again, you're right there, Patrick, you're right, because the context, the issues are always the same, but the context is different. So there's a difference between saying, I can't get on that, they're getting rid of the 46A and I can't get on that bus anymore and I can't get into town because no ramp in it, to saying, I don't even have a wheelchair to get on my house. And if I do get a wheelchair to get out of my house, then there's the bridge has been washed away. You know, to people with albinism who are one of our partners, the African Albinism Network in with CBM, and I've worked with them, and they're a wonderful organization. To people with albinism being the focus of hate crimes in parts of the world as well.
mm.
So it's the issue again, like I was saying, the context is always different, but the issues are always the same. Not been listened to, not getting enough resources, and not been supported to have a fully inclusive society as well. Um, so yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised to hear that. We kind of assume it's always worse in the developing world in every way than it is here. It's
we
not just.
do, because I think that's the narrative we're spun. Like that's the story we're spun, and in many ways, like the world has changed now. We're moving away from the north and the south, the west is the best, and all that kind of thing. I
Mm,
mean, there was this thing called globalization where the world was all connected, and now that's coming a little bit apart, and we're seeing that in various aspects, that there's different global powers at the moment and different ideas about how things should be done. And that's not a bad thing either. That's like, one idea is not always the best in the world. Like, for instance, the one thing that I think CBM does very well, or what we're hoping to do well, is the idea of localized solutions for local challenges.
mm,
Like, there's no point coming in there, us, and saying, you need to do it this way. That doesn't work. That would be like going from, Dublin to Roscommon and say, you can't be doing it that way. That's not how it works. Like, you have to work with people in their own spaces that they know they're the experts through experience, no more than we're the experts in experience in Ireland. Disabled people in Kenya or Malawi or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, they're the experts in their spaces. And it's listening to them and then supporting them with whatever logistical support we can to enable them to take part in policy making practices.
So it's a community-based approach that you have, basically, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a dual approach too. I mean, my role now within CBM is I'm managing a project called Funding Fair Futures, and it's trying to make climate justice inclusive. And I don't work in Europe at all. My work focuses in primarily Africa and Asia. So it's a very simple project in the sense, it's simple in the sense that when we think of climate change, we don't think of disabled people being part of that conversation, do we? Or women or young people. We always think climate change happens somewhere else. Or if it does happen, we're always seen as victims. But if we're seen as empowered citizens where we can actually buy into the climate talks, the climate dialogues. Give an example. Public public transport. Public transport's good for everybody. It's not just good for, a choice. But the more public transport we have, the less emissions we have. We're building better societies. It's accessible for everyone. There's more freedom of movement. There's more liberty. The same with better homes. If we have better homes, better built houses, they're warmer, they're safer for everybody, not just disabled people, not just, whatever. Um, and it makes a better society, a healthier society, but you have to engage in dialogue to do that. So with the climate movement, we need to bring in more voices into that have been kind of usually not heard so much, and disabled people are part of that. And what we're doing in this project, and we've got partners all over Europe, Climate Action Network Europe, EcoLease, Women Empowered for a Common Future, and ourselves in CBM Ireland, is that we're working in 8 countries: Burkina Faso, which is the country in North Africa, Northwest Africa, Zimbabwe, Kenya, um, Nepal, Bangladesh, just what's the other one? Laos, and geez, I always get the other one wrong then. I always forget one of them. And then another one. And what we're doing there is that we're funding small DPOs, grassroots disabled persons organizations, to capacity build, whether that's like come together and decide upon a plan, have a chat, and then talk about how climate change affects them and what they can do in their local area and national area to influence climate policy. And unfortunately, Patrick, in the global south, climate change is having a massive effect by the people who don't really contribute, hasn't contributed to it. Climate change has been affected by industrialization in the global north and China predominantly. I have to put China into because China is a massive, massive polluter. And yet the people who are paying the most for it are the people who had the least contribution to it. And out of those people, it's disabled people who are the most who have been affected by that, and disabled women. And you're having droughts, you're having floods, you're having, severe storms, you're having infrastructure that's there has been washed away. So people have to say, well, if we're going to solve this, then we have to solve this at a local level. This could be talking about, solar panels. It could be talking about making sure that when there is climate policies in certain countries, that they're actually consulted about and see what they need in their local area. Because you won't solve climate problems without bringing people along and solving social problems at the same time. So you have to have climate justice and social justice at the same time. Otherwise, you're bringing your bottles to little and getting them recycled, and you don't care too much about it.
Um, originally began as a blind mission, but obviously you deal with the whole range of disabilities now, do you? In the
Oh
different
yeah, well, it's
countries?
all impairments. All impairments are known. We don't, and any, it's not. I mean, it says Christian Brown mission, but that's again, it's just the old title. We deal with
Yeah.
everyone. It's not just impairment. I mean, look, I think the thing is too is that like I come from a very strong again. I come from a very strong social model background. That's my bread and butter. Peter Cairns, I think you know him, do you?
We do, yeah, we do.
Yeah, Peter Cairns unfortunately was the one that betted into me many years ago, and I've been involved in disability for the last 25 years. Um, I know I look 21, but I'm not. Um, I've been involved in disability for a long time, since I was a young fella. Probably usually in the background, never really at the front. But I know that a lot of the time, what we have that brings us together is more than what we have drives us apart. So I don't see the difference. I know specifically people with visual impairments and people with oral impairments, and physical impairments may have different needs, but the things that combine us are always the same, not been listened to, not been taken seriously, not been allowed to come together collectively and say what we actually need, not been allowed to drive the services that are meant for us, but never involve us. That's something that I've always felt very, very, very passionate about. And my work with the DPOs, and I'm still part of a DPO, I'm still a member of them, has always been coming together collectively and talking about stuff and learning from people too. Like, I mean, learning from people that have come before us. Like, you're out in Blanchardstown there, Maureen McGoffin, like a
Yes,
legend.
yeah,
I mean, there was people who were always, when we think of the disability rights movement in Ireland, we always think of one person, right? But there was so many other people who were behind the scenes, and chipping away at stuff. Selena Bonny. I mean, many of them, Des Kenny. And I learned from them too how to come together and how to actually build something and build a movement and bring that forward. Unfortunately, Irish disability movement is not represented outside Ireland. No, that's not to do with me, but we're not represented outside Ireland. There's not one Irish disabled person represented in the International Disability Forum at all.
right.
It's service providers that are represented there. And I see internationally working with the DPOs in Kenya and Zimbabwe and all different countries how they are represented in their area. They may not have the resources that we have or the services, but I'll tell you something, they have the capacity and they're building together and they have the willingness to work together too and be listened to. So that's a different thing.
It says on your website that you have a new strategy kind of coming up or in preparation.
In CBM,
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the strategy. I think that'll be a global one too. Again, we work on a federated model, so
Right.
where we're all separate entities in many ways, we all come together too with CBM Global. We have actually our head of advocacy is great. Dr. Mary Keogh, she's in the Dublin office. She's wonderful, and Mary's been there for many years. So it's a very strong inclination towards disability rights. Um, I've worked like outside of CBM in different spaces at the UN and worked in civil society in the UN. And it's grand interacting with those big boys and the European Parliament and all that. But a lot of the time you're banging the head off the wall.
Mm.
And change usually happens on the ground. It doesn't usually happen at top and flow down. They can say all they want, but it doesn't. And it's really my job and my passion and my thing is working with disabled. I'm that's who I work for. I work for disabled people. That's I've always been my job. And CBM has this project that I'm working on, the climate project and social justice project, which works really well. The strategy that CBM takes, as I said before, it's like the dual mandate, Patrick. There is the health aspect of it, not curing disabilities or trying to bring people back to normal, but making sure that people have the healthcare they need. We all need healthcare because just because we're disabled doesn't mean we need to go to the doctor or the dentist, God forbid. And then there's the other aspect, which is amplifying disabled people's voice, collective grassroots DPO movements' voices in the global south, and making sure that they're heard by the global north as well as the international perspective as well.
What about mental health in the global south? Is there a
Yeah.
high awareness of that, the importance of that as
Well,
well?
would you
Yeah.
believe we have a wonderful, see, this is something I like about CBM actually have a great mental health programs across the board. We had one in Kenya recently. I've a colleague called Edgar is working on that. And we had a mental health director for many years. So mental health has always been part of that story,
Mm.
always been seen as something that can bring people together. That is a nice aspect of CBM. And you can see that. And we have a director of mental health too. We just got a new one actually. Ben is starting again. Our old guy moved on. So that has been always a program that we run. So we run certain programs in certain countries. So for instance, we get a ball of money. Well, not a ball of money. We get a bit of money from Irish Aid or whoever. We run a program in a certain country. So it could be a program on mental health, but bringing people together to talk about mental health, working through the processes, taking a holistic approach to that, not just a clinical approach, and breaking down those kind of barriers and prejudices that may exist in society, and indeed our own internal ableism. Um, and that is a one nice strand that I do think CPM are very good at. And indeed in Southern Ireland we worked on that just recently in Kenya. And there is a whole strand on that as well. We also do something too called disaster risk reduction. Um, and I have a colleague Tushar, he's the head of that. And risk reduction it's very important. It's when stuff happens, when bad stuff happens, when there's a flood, when there's a civil war, when there's something, blackouts, landslides, that the powers that be, the Red Cross, whoever the UN, are involving disabled people in these decisions, are making sure that disabled people are actively contacted and how to contact them and all the kind of technical things that are there. Now, when we get to that position, we're just counteracting something that's happened. But it's there and it's a wonderful thing to have that disaster risk reduction group. Um, and they'll give inclusion advice to certain places, whether it be the World Food Program or something like that as well.
Yeah. The concept of inclusion advisory, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be my segment. I
All
mean,
right.
for me,
Okay.
right, I'll tell you what my reading of inclusion is, Patrick. Um, Firstly, you can't have inclusion without disabled people. Disabled people have to drive inclusion. We are experts through experience, but also we're experts through expertise. Um, and inclusion is more than just subtitles or an ISL or easy to read. They're the basic things,
Yeah.
but it's actually having that. Though this is my reading, not CPM's. It's actually making sure that when disabled people's organizations are talked to and talked with, that it's an equal relationship, that it's a relationship based on fairness, not just based on, come here, we want to ask you a question. Um, and that's what my understanding of disability inclusion is. And I don't think disability inclusion can be achieved without an understanding of disability equality, which is very different to disability awareness. And disability equality is something that we all know, we all get, but sometimes we find it hard to put into words. Um, and that's the one thing that underpins everything for me as a value is disability equality. It's about thinking about disability differently. Once you start thinking about disability as something that's socially and culturally constructed, and then it's the same thing as gender or race or sexuality or color, that it's just part of human difference rather than something that's strange and out there and away. Once you start thinking about that, everything else works, you know?
Yeah.
You can understand the Convention of the Rights of Disabled People. You can understand the Sustainable Development Goals. You can understand the National Disability Strategy. We'll see what that looks like. Um, you can understand the human rights aspect of disability. But getting to that point where, first of all, is the basic, it may seem very basic and it may seem very simple, but you know, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, nothing wrong with a bit of tea and toast. We don't all have to have gnocchi and halloumi. So getting to the point where we first of all have that basic thing covered, we're all agreed on, move on from that. So that's what disability inclusion is to me, myself personally.
Yeah, the idea of climate justice is not two words I'd
Mm,
have kind of put together myself before, as we always think about it in kind of technical terms, don't we? We have to counteract
obviously, yeah.
the change in the climate and all that. So that's an interesting. That's basically your area, isn't it? Climate justice. Yeah.
My area, well, yeah, I mean, my area is really inclusion, and it's disability equality and working with DPOs. That's my bread and
All right.
butter.
Yeah.
But the climate justice project, yeah. So I think climate justice is the thing is that we sometimes think that I can be very technical though, Patrick. I mean, all this stuff about like national contributions and carbon credits and all that. What does that mean to me? You? What does that mean to the people in Mayo that have had no power for the last week? What does that mean to the people in in Tanzania or Western Tanzania that haven't had rain in 2 months? It means nothing. Electric cars, EVs and greenways. No, but you have to make it real. So there's no point saying to people, you can't use your car anymore. You can't burn turf anymore. Well, you can't. You can't burn coal anymore without giving people an alternative and saying, what do you need and how can we work around with it? That's what climate justice is. It's not about just saving we have to save the planet anyway. It's going to happen. But unless we bring people along and consult people about it and not constantly shout at people that you're doing the wrong thing and you're
Yeah.
bad and go throw oil on paintings in the Louvre in Paris and start supergluing yourself to, a Ferrari. That's daftness. That doesn't achieve anything.
No.
No, it has its place, but be pragmatic about stuff. Like we're all going to have to adapt now to this climate because if we don't, we wreck the house and there's nothing going to come back into it. So you can't have a shift towards more sustainable climate policies without bringing people along. A simple thing like this, the plastic bag things. You remember when that came in years ago?
Yeah.
You weren't allowed to bring your plastic bag, right?
Yeah.
And everyone's like, how am I going to the shop and how am I going to get my messages? But it worked because you have people buying into it.
Mm.
And that's done a great thing. The same thing now, it's about public transport. There's no point telling people you can't use your cars without having good public transport in place. Like I hear a lot about the disabled drivers and about how there's only a certain amount of people who are disabled drivers. Majority of disabled people will use public transport.
Mm.
That's the way it is. And yes, great, fantastic. Have the wheelchair accessible vehicles, have that, I've got all that done, that's important. But you try and have the greatest effect for the greatest amount of people, whether they're disabled people, parents, elderly people, because we're all going to grow old anyway. And then you put in better public transport systems. You make sure that like there's areas, our communities are vibrant, that we have libraries and pharmacies and shops and creches and community centres. And that's by creating climate justice. This is the same working into social justice as well.
Right. We're running out of time. So is there anything
No
else
bother, no bother, Patrick.
is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up, James?
No, thanks a million for asking this. I mean, when I think the thing is too is that it's great. I'd love to see Irish disabled people more and more getting involved in DPOs. We have
Yes.
several of them in the country, whether it's yourself in Blanchardstown or Isle of May or you know, um, those ones. And I'm very proud of the work we did with that. And kind of thinking too that nothing changes if we don't change it.
Mm.
You know, I remember years ago. I'll tell you this. I told this years ago. I remember my brother saying to me something. I was given off because it was a credit union and I couldn't get into my credit union. They got a new credit union. They changed the building and they put in this building. There's 3 steps into it. And I was like, how am I meant to get into that now? And I was getting angry. It was about 20 years ago. My brother says to me, he was one from America, he says, well, what do they say? The quiet mouth doesn't get fed. And I said, sound. So I went up there and I didn't have much. I took all my money out of the credit union. I said, I'm taking that out of that now. There you go. That's because it's inaccessible. But that's, I always say, the quiet mouth doesn't get fed. Nothing will change if we don't change it, but we have to change it collectively. And that's the most important thing. And whatever differences we always have more in common than we do that drives us apart.
Okay,
And
James.
just saying hello to all the gang in Granby Place, all the CBM and all CBM people.
Yeah. Okay, James, thank you very much. That was very interesting.
No bother.
Yeah.